For more than 70 years, North Korea has been a destabilizing presence in Asia. The rogue state has continued to threaten militarily not only its neighbors, but the world with its nuclear arsenal.
우리는 제국주의자들의 핵 위협이 계속되는 한 경제 건설과 함께 핵무력 건설을 절대 불변의 노선으로 틀어지고 핵 억제력을 더욱 옥석같이 다져 나가야 합니다.
The threats have cast a shadow over the Asian century, and the pariah state's rhetoric is becoming even more strident. The United States has never hesitated to return fire.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
North Korea, one of the world's most secretive nations, didn't achieve its nuclear capacity on its own. The world helped. Every day in the South Korean capital of Seoul, citizens go about their daily lives knowing that at any moment, everything could be torn asunder. The city's more than 25 million citizens reside just 50 kilometers from the border with North Korea. With the current nuclear threat, emergency exercises across the city have been stepped up. Today, the University of Seoul is the backdrop for an imagined terrorist strike. This exercise is executed with military precision. The possibility of a destructive attack has intensified ever since that fateful day, the 9th of October 2006, when deep underground, North Korea detonated its first nuclear bomb. An event that was to resonate throughout the region and the world with its impact on the Asian century.
온 나라 전체 인민이 사회주의 강성되고 건설해서 일대 비약을 창조해 나가는 벅찬 시기에 우리 과학연구 부문에서는 주체 95 2006년 10월 9일 지하 핵시험을 안전하게 성공적으로 진행하였다.
Menghimbau Korea Utara untuk tentu tidak mengembangkan persenjataan nuklir.
There needs to be some appropriate punishment for the North Koreans for doing this.
I have a very interesting memory that in the early 1990s, when I worked as a researcher for the Korea's financial unification, and there was a research mission asked by the Ministry of Unification that the topic was, what if North Korea conducts a nuclear weapon test? Just what if?
The what if became a reality. The underground nuclear explosion was detected by a network of earthquake sensors at the Korea Meteorological Administration in Seoul. Seismic instruments sent back data that didn't suggest an earthquake.
그때 당시에는 상당히 특이한 지진 파형이 이제 기록이 되기 시작을 했습니다. 북한 쪽에서부터 오는 이제 지진 파형이었었는데 그 파형이 도착하는 시간과 그다음에 그 파형으로 봤을 때 일반적인 자연 지진이 아니었기 때문에 여기 근무하는 사람들이 상당히 이제 놀라웠었고 그래서 긴급히 많은 분석자들이 모여서 지진에 대해서 이제 분석을 하기 시작을 했습니다.
The data was able to tell them that the seismic waves came from an explosion rather than natural causes. It also revealed the secret location of the underground test. It came from Punggye-ri in the northern highlands of North Korea. The state's detonation of its first nuclear bomb didn't just impact South Korea or its allies. North Korean Ken Eom was a soldier in the regime's army at the time. He remembers well the huge rally he attended in Pyongyang. 100,000 people celebrated the successful explosion.
I was there first of all, I feel a little bit proud because we have a nuclear weapon, even successful. But those feelings is not very important for me because even if we have a nuclear weapon, we are always hungry.
That hunger, and the fact that the rest of his family had already defected across the border, persuaded him to defect to South Korea in 2010. He says North Korea's determination to have a nuclear weapon is something it will never give up.
Nobody can control of North Korean nuclear weapon, even United States.
North Korea's doggedness to obtain nuclear capability harkens back to the defeat of Japan in 1945. As the country began the challenging task of rebuilding itself, American troops occupied the south and Soviet forces the north. The two superpowers drew an arbitrary line down the middle called the 38th parallel. It cut the country in half. The division led to a series of bloody conflicts along the new border, which escalated dramatically in 1950, when North Korea invaded the South. The Korean War had begun. It was a bloody conflict that would forever impact North Korea's relations with Asia and the rest of the world.
South Korean villages awoke to a world suddenly filled with noise and flame. The communists, made bold by months of small-scale raiding across the 38th parallel, had finally launched their undeclared, all-out war of conquest. The Red forces had moved swiftly. In 2 days, they were attacking the capital city itself. Seoul fell the next day, June 28th. By June 30th, the communists had crossed the Han River south of Seoul and fought through the rail city of Yongdong-po. With their heavy Russian-made tanks, they thrust aside South Korean resistance.
Finally, though, our amphibious gear crammed full of rock and American Marines with only 10 aircraft. We did.
The American-led Allied forces regrouped to block the invasion.
The forces of the United Nations are in Korea to put down an aggression that threatens not only the whole fabric of the United Nations, but all human hopes of peace and justice. If the United Nations yields to the forces of aggression, no nation will be safe or secure. If aggression is successful in Korea, we can expect it to spread throughout Asia and Europe and to this hemisphere. We are fighting in Korea for our own national security and survival.
The president has stated that the use of the atomic bomb is being considered to halt the communist onrush inspired by Russia. His hope is that the employment of this devastating weapon will be unnecessary.
And one method of dealing with enemy rearguards is a fierce barrage of rockets.
The Allied forces devastated North Korea.
Another rain of rockets is backed up with inflammable jelly bombs. An ammunition dump is hit. This is the end of the battle for Seoul, capital of the Republic. The final job of mopping up snipers ends in victory. Along with United States Air Force units doing a round-the-clock job of delivering...
The war never officially ended, even though an armistice was signed in 1953. Over 1 million people died. Though the US never used nuclear weapons, it was a threat North Korea never forgot. The Korean War in the 1950s resulted from a brutal game of geopolitics that was to have a lasting effect on the Asian century. War became the inevitable outcome of such Cold War brinkmanship. The mere threat of a nuclear attack became a powerful political tool. The Americans intensified the nuclear fear with a public awareness campaign back home.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and cover, ducked and cover.
He did what we all...
Even school children were targeted in animated films such as Duck and Cover, made by the US Department of Defense in 1952.
Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
In reaction to the American nuclear threat, North Korea's president, Kim Il-sung, began pursuing his own nuclear program.
1950년대에도 김일성이 동유럽 순방하고 또 소련 순방할 때 소련의 핵 기지를 방문해서 그것을 보는 그 동영상을 저는 본 적이 있는데 그만큼 소련의 핵 기술에 대해서 북한은 관심이 많았다. 이런 입장을 직접적인 표현을 하지 않았지만 간접적으로 갖고 있었다고 봐야 될 것 같고요.
It didn't take long for their ambitions to be realized. Ironically, it was their enemy, America, that opened the nuclear door for them. In 1953, President Eisenhower delivered to the UN his historic Atoms for Peace speech.
The United States pledges before you, and therefore before the world, its determination to help solve the fearful atomic dilemma, to devote its entire heart and mind to find the way by which the miraculous inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life.
The Voice of America was beginning to give the world translations of the president's...
Despite their destructive power, the president was declaring that nuclear weapons could actually be used for good and as a deterrent to war. North Korean leader Kim Il-sung reached out to China for help. He met with Chinese leader Mao Zedong, who had presided over a $2 billion program to build China's own nuclear bomb. China rejected the overture. Undeterred, North Korea turned to the Soviet Union for assistance.
North Korea, like many countries, took advantage of Atoms for Peace and sought a reactor, a small research reactor from the Soviet Union, and got the highly enriched uranium fuel to outfit that reactor. So it started in the same way as many countries, many of which never built nuclear weapons. They developed a civilian nuclear energy program. Some went on to build power plants. Some went on to make medical isotopes. And North Korea really started that way.
In 1965, with Soviet support, North Korea installed its first research reactor at Yongbyon, north of the capital Pyongyang. It wasn't big enough to produce nuclear weapons, but it was a start. In the 1980s, North Korea's nuclear program really took off. It went on a shopping trip to Europe to procure the design plans it needed to build this 5-megawatt production reactor at Yongbyon. North Korea diplomat Yon Ho-jin, who doubled as a spy, was based in Vienna. He had no trouble gathering from various European countries the plans and components needed to build the bigger reactor at Yongbyon. North Korea acquired declassified British designs for its reactor, Belgian plans for fuel reprocessing, and German-made aluminium components vital for building the bigger reactor.
North Koreans felt pretty free to buy in Europe, and there were companies that were more than happy to sell. That also changed in the early 90s, and everyone got a lot tougher. And and North Korea upped its game, became more deceptive.
When they needed to acquire a high-precision measuring device from Japan, they ordered it through overseas subsidiaries, such as in Europe, and shipped the items through a network of middlemen, concealing the final destination at every port of call. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Iron Curtain had fallen. As President Gorbachev handed power over to his successor, Boris Yeltsin, North Korea lost its most important ally that had sustained it for nearly half a century. Its nuclear bomb development plans took a hit.
사회주의권이 붕괴되는 과정에서 엄청난 충격을 받았다. 그것은 결국 북한이 독자적으로 자신들의 체제 유지를 위해서 뭔가를 해야 되는 그 상황에서 핵이라고 하는 것이 북한을 지켜줄 수 있는 보검이다. 북한식 표현을 하면 그런 식으로 북한은 받아들이고 있는 것이고, 또 하나는 가다피나 또는 후세인의 말로를 보면서 또 우크라이나 사태를 보면서 자신들이 군사적인 차원에서 핵을 보유하지 않으면 김정은 위원장도 또는 북한 체제도 굉장히 위태롭거나 붕괴될 수밖에 없다는 그런 위기의식 속에서 핵을 갖게 되는.
Unexpectedly, the Soviet collapse provided North Korea with a possible windfall.
러시아로 넘어가는 이 과정에서 러시아가 그들을 제대로 관리하지 못하는 이런 상황에서 그들의 그런 기술적인 부분이 북한으로 넘어왔을 가능성도 일부 배제할 수는 없다고 봅니다.
The warning bells were ringing internationally about North Korea's nuclear ambitions.
But in 1991 March, there was an academic paper published in the United States regarding North Korea's nuclear weapon program. The title was North Korea. The Next Nuclear Nightmare. Before then, general public didn't know what's happening in North Korea.
This paper revealed the extent of North Korea's secretive nuclear program to the world. Despite also being a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, North Korea had continued to develop its nuclear arsenal.
If you sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, within a couple years, you're supposed to make a declaration about your nuclear program and then let the inspectors come in and verify that declaration. It never happened. And so the United States was complaining more. Using satellite imagery analysis, again, the United States saw the construction of a plutonium separation plant, a reprocessing plant, and became more alarmed that you had a reactor making plutonium, you'd have a facility separating plutonium, and once it's separated, it could be used in nuclear weapons.
North Korea did allow the International Atomic Energy Agency in to inspect its nuclear facility, but blocked access to crucial areas of the plant.
Our position to that issue is clear and unchanged. EPRK will never allow inspection on two sites.
What they did was essentially decide to hide things from the inspectors and try to disguise that they had separated more plutonium than they declared. They probably had a nuclear weapons program that was very active, and the IA saw through it and challenged North Korea.
In March 1993, North Korea withdrew itself from the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
It was a very defining moment in the sense that this was the first nuclear power that broke off from Non-Proliferation Treaty and demonstrated its defiance to the world. Asia was not on the forefront of the international politics at the time, but this event was significant in this sense, purely from the nuclear world order that here is another nuclear armed country now emerging in a very disturbed region in the world.
Despite the death of North Korea's founder, Kim Il-sung, in 1994, the development of its nuclear program intensified under its new leader, Kim Jong-il.
당과 정부 간부들과 함께
위대한 수령 김일성 동지의 영전에 깊은 애도의 뜻을 표하시고 영구를 돌아보셨습니다.
North Korea had been building its own ballistic missiles when Pakistan came knocking. It used this relationship to get in the door of the Pakistani nuclear program.
And at that time, India was conducting a lot of ballistic missile tests. So the Pakistanis reached out to China and North Korea to get the ballistic missile technology, which the North Koreans were very willing to sell on a very cheap price. I think it was barely 250 million.
North Korea knew that Pakistan had the latest centrifuge technology to refine highly enriched uranium.
So you had centrifuge experts working on learning from the North Koreans how to make sensitive components of the No-Dong missile. And the North Koreans said, well, why don't you teach us how to make centrifuges? And they agreed to do that. And so that's really how it got started.
A key player in Pakistan's nuclear program was Abdul Qadir Khan, the controversial father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb. A.Q. Khan was much more than just a scientist. He gained international notoriety by secretly developing an international network that trafficked in nuclear secrets.
This network involved about 8 to 10 other countries whose top businessmen had equal interest and equal money business interest in their own empire respectively, whether it was in Netherlands or in South Africa or in Germany or Britain, Malaysia and elsewhere.
A.Q. Khan gave North Korea centrifuge technology to refine uranium, the primary ingredient that fuels a nuclear explosion. With the cooperation in full swing, scientists were flying between both countries, exchanging information and teaching one another. They placed orders for super-strong steel, ball bearings, and metal tubes. Individually innocent items, but put together, they would create the world's most devastating weapon. North Korea shipped these items through a number of intermediaries to conceal their final destination. But intelligence agencies began to catch on.
So you had tensions really rising, or fears of a military strike more than a nuclear strike. I don't think the U.S. would have used nuclear weapons.
With the risk of war in the air, North Korea struck a deal. It agreed to freeze its nuclear weapons program. In exchange, the United States, South Korea, and Japan agreed to supply Pyongyang with 2 light-water nuclear reactors. These were suitable for producing power, but not nuclear weapons. Despite signing the deal, North Korea continued to develop its bomb, in secret.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will
In January 2001, President George W. Bush was elected into office. He had North Korea firmly in his sights as a threat.
So help me God.
So help me God. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger.
이것은 사실상 우리에 대한 선전포고나 다름이 없다.
But President Bush's focus was on a different dictator, Saddam Hussein. North Korea quietly continued its nuclear weapons program, an initiative that was to have a deadly impact on its Asian neighbors. A leaked letter between A.Q. Khan and North Korean officials in 1998 was a bombshell. It revealed that Pakistani officials were secretly exchanging nuclear technology in return for money and jewels.
A.Q. Khan consistently, in my presence and many times, assured the highest leadership in the military that the technicians who are only training the Pakistanis on the missile technology and the centrifuge location is way away and they're not involved in that at all. And A.Q. Khan was such a personality that when he assures the highest leadership in the country, president, prime minister, and the military leadership, everybody would believe him. But he was lying.
The Pakistani government launched an investigation into A.Q. Khan's activities. While many officials were thought to be involved, A.Q. Khan took all the blame, and then, surprisingly, was pardoned. In a political play, North Korea invited a number of scientists to visit its Yongbyon nuclear facility.
Well, one is its propaganda value. I mean, that pure and simple, they had a point to make. The North Koreans wanted to establish and settle a debate that was raging internationally, and you had countries like Japan and South Korea saying, they can't build a bomb.
Siegfried Hecker was one of the invited scientists.
They were in a conference room, and they brought in a red metal box, opened that up, and inside was a white wooden box with a slide off top. They opened that up, and the inside were two glass jars, sort of like jelly jars, with a screw-on lid, tightly taped. And they said, this first one has 150 grams of oxalate, plutonium oxalate powder, certain chemical form of plutonium. The second jar, they said, well, that's the product. That's plutonium metal in this jar. And they said it's 200 grams of plutonium metal.
Many people were left scratching their heads, wondering how North Korea could have produced enough material to make a nuclear bomb.
We are aggressively pursuing another dangerous source of proliferation. Black market operatives who sell equipment and expertise related to weapons of mass destruction.
Then,
온 나라 전체 인민이 사회주의에 강성되고 건설해서 일대 피약을 창조해 나가는 벅찬 시기에
To get a successful nuclear explosion test requires a lot of technical ability. It was not a surprise to the Pakistanis in the sense because they did not dismiss North Korea's technical ability as the other countries would have done so.
After 15 or 16 years, our diplomatic efforts to deter North Korea from conducting this nuclear test was finally done. It was nothing else than just frustration and agony.
the world reacted by imposing economic sanctions on North Korea.
한 4억 5,400만 불인데 7월 미사일 발사 이후에 그것이 지금 80% 정도가 중단돼 있는 겁니다. 그리고 이 중단이 이제 지속된다는 말씀을 드렸습니다. 그래서 이 정도의 그 규모라는 것은 다른 어떤 나라가 취한 조치보다도 매우 강력한 것이다.
We think it's very important for the North Koreans to come back to the table. There's a six-party talk framework that is hopeful and positive for them. It requires them to make some difficult decisions, and of course one of them is to get rid of their nuclear arsenal.
It would be seen as such a terrible event that President Bush would take very sharp action. Instead, he did almost nothing. He issued a kind of a condemnation, but kind of said, look, as long as if you spread fissile material or nuclear explosive material or nuclear weapons, then you're in real trouble.
North Korea again diffused some of the tension by promising concessions.
Specifically, North Korea agreed that within 60 days, it will shut down and seal all operations at the primary nuclear facilities it has used to produce weapons-grade plutonium. It has agreed to allow international inspectors to verify and monitor this progress.
North Korea destroyed the most visible symbol of their nuclear weapons program, the cooling tower at the main atomic reactor complex. It was an international reprieve.
오늘 우리 냉각탑 해체는 아주 우리 육자 회담이 한 단계 더 정진했다는 걸 실질적으로 보여주는 증거라고 봅니다.
But the good times were not to last. North Korea conducted its second nuclear test.
우리 과학자 기술자들의 요구에 따라 공화국의 자위적 핵 억제력을 백방으로 강화하기 위한 조치의 일환으로 주체 98 2009년 5월 25일 또 한 차례의 지하핵 시험을 성과적으로 진행하였다.
Diplomatic relations between the two nations were further strained.
양국 국방부 장관은 북한의 핵실험과 장단거리 미사일 발사, 그리고 최근 남북 관계 등을 포함한 지역 안보 정세에 대해서 심도 있게 의견을 교환했고 2차 핵실험 등 북한의 지속적인 긴장 조성이 한반도와 동북아 및 세계 평화 안정에 결코 도움이 되지 않는다는 데 인식을 같이 했습니다.
The new American President Barack Obama inherited the Korean problem from his predecessor.
Given their past behavior, given the belligerent manner in which they are constantly threatening their neighbors, I don't think there's any question that that would be a destabilizing situation.
In November 2010, the North Koreans went on the front foot to showcase their nuclear might. US nuclear scientist Siegfried Hecker was invited back to visit their facility, which now had 2,000 centrifuges.
My jaw just dropped. I was stunned to see what looked like hundreds and hundreds of centrifuges lined up, two at each, at 3 different locations. It was just stunning. In a clean facility, modern facility, looking down, I said, oh my God, they actually did what they said they were going to do.
Despite presenting clear evidence of its advancing nuclear program, the regime continued to toy with perceptions, both in Asia and the rest of the world.
우리는 필요한 만큼 핵무기를 생산할 것이지만 핵군비 경쟁에 참가하거나 핵무기를 필요 이상으로 과잉 생산하지 않을 것이며 다른 핵보유국들과 동등한 입장에서 국제적인 핵군축 노력에 참가할 것이다.
Kim Jong-il's son, Kim Jong-un, started appearing publicly with his father as part of a well-orchestrated plan for leadership succession. In December 2011, North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-il, died and was succeeded by his 27-year-old son. North Korea went into a massive public display of mourning over the death of their leader. With a rookie president in the driver's seat, the future direction of the country's nuclear plans was sending shudders around Asia and the globe.
최후의 승리를 반드시 이룩하고야 흉흉한군으로 그 위력만 선하였던
북핵 문제는 사실상 이제 북핵 문제, 그러니까 북핵 개발을 막는 단계는 끝나버렸고 실제로 북한은 핵 능력을 가진 국가다 이렇게 볼 수 있어요. 인도, 파키스탄, 이스라엘이 들어가죠. 이렇게 보면 북한은 불행하지만 뉴클리어 케이퍼블 컨트리에 지금 와 있다. 이제 북한이 가지고 있는 핵을 폐기하고 제거하는 패러다임이 변한 거죠.
In 2011, North Korea's new supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, spoke publicly on the centennial of the birth of his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. It was the first time the leader's voice had ever been heard.
예나 지금이나 나라의 지정학적 위치는 변함이 없지만 열강들의 각 축전마당으로 무참히 짓밟히던 어젯날의 약소국이 오늘은 당당한 정치 군사 강국으로 전변되었으며 우리 인민은 그 누구도 감히 건드릴 수 없는 자주적 인민으로 존엄 떨치고 있습니다.
Perceived as one of the most isolated countries in the world, North Korea actually exports nearly $3 billion worth of goods a year. 80% of them go to China.
China values exports, so it's a lethal mix if you want to control the spread of commodities that end up in places like North Korea. So you have a real effort getting the Chinese to reform their system and make non-proliferation a priority.
군사기술적 우세는 더는 제국주의자들의 독점물이 아니며 적들이 원자탄으로 우리를 위협 공갈하던 시대는 영원히 지나갔습니다.
주체 105 2016년 1월 6일 10시 주체 조선의 첫 수소탄 시험이 성공적으로 진행되었다.
North Korea is now concentrating on developing nuclear warheads for its missiles. Much like the nuclear program, North Korea has begged, borrowed, and stolen to advance its missile program.
When North Korea launches one of its space launch vehicles, each stage of the missile falls into the ocean, and you can recover the debris. And inside, you can find ball bearings from the Soviet Union, electronics from Switzerland. You can find, an entire global map of all these either cheap electronics that are not cost effective for North Korea to produce, to design information that was stolen or shared or co-opted from other states.
These launches are provocative. They're a violation of North Korea's obligations internationally. Its nuclear and missile programs are a threat to not only the ROK, but to Japan, other allies in the region, partners in the region, and to the United States.
우리는 미국의 핵 위협으로부터 우리 자신을 지키기 위하여 막강한 핵을 보유한 이상 전면 전쟁에는 전면 전쟁으로 핵 전쟁에는 우리식의 핵 타격전으로 주저없이 맞대응할 것이며 미제와의 반가리 결전에서 반드시 승자가 될 것이다.
With each subsequent nuclear test, the seismic waves show a growing magnitude in destructive power. This was matched with the increasing nervousness of the regime's neighbor.
지진을 분석을 하면서도 그 커져가는 규모에 대한 두려움은 점점 커져갈 수밖에 없습니다.
With President Trump now in the White House, the menacing tone of the rhetoric is escalating.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
이성적인 사고를 못하는 망령이된 자와는 정상적인 대화가 통할 수 없으며 절대적인 힘으로 다스려야 한다는 것이 우리 전략군 장병들의 판단이다.
북한 핵 문제는 현재 상태를 보면 트럼프 대통령과 김정은 위원장이 마주 달리는 자동차, 치킨 게임을 벌이고 있는 듯한 그런 모습을 보이고 있다.
On the 3rd of September 2017, North Korea conducted its 6th nuclear test.
Nothing has worked. And both sides are to blame. I mean, when I say both sides, it's really fundamentally this comes down to between the United States and North Korea. And both want a lot, but don't want to give very much. And in the United States, the administration may want to give a lot, but then Congress makes that difficult.
Having used their international supply chain to develop nuclear weapons, North Korea now doesn't hesitate to wield its newfound power.
Well, if Saddam Hussein really had the bomb, had demonstrated the bomb in the 80s, for example, do you really think he would have been invaded in 2003? Had Libya not given up the weapon systems as what they were trying to acquire, they would have been invaded? Now that question continues to remain unanswered.
I think that the one thing that catches my breath sometimes is our deep desire to believe that they are incapable. And the more we believe that they're incapable, the more they will want to prove that they are capable. They are only as good as what we believe. Otherwise, the tool is useless to them.
As North Korea and the United States continue to fire nuclear barbs at each other, the world holds its breath.
The more you threaten them, the more they are showing the middle finger. That's not the way to deal with this kind of a regime. So maybe the U.S. has to find a different way to deal with them.
My preference is to bring back a number of tactical nuclear weapons to the Korean Peninsula and match with North Korean nuclear capabilities, and then maintain stable nuclear balance on the Korean Peninsula.
For more than 70 years, North Korea has continued to develop its nuclear weapons program with a consistent disregard for the reaction of its Asian neighbors and the world. To date, they have tested 6 nuclear bombs, each one more destructive than its predecessor. While North Korea continues to push the limits of acceptable behavior, debate rages on how to deal with the Hermit Kingdom. The seismic ripples from its first nuclear test in 2006 continue to unnerve not only Asia, but the world.